TMCnet at Astrocon 2008.
Hi, we're coming to you from Astrocon. It's the 5th annual Astrocon event, and this year it's being held in Glendale, Arizona. With me right now is John Todd, Open Source Community Director for Digium. John, welcome.
Hi, thanks.
So John, what are some of the more important criteria that organizations need to consider when they're migrating to open source?
Sure. When you're looking at open source, a lot of people consider it to be free software. And it is free software, but the problem is that nothing is free. And so when you're looking at open source, one of the things that we see most often is that people have to have some experience in-house if they're going to be doing this and integrating it into the product base that they have. There's no such thing as free, and that means you either have to have some expertise already built in, meaning your staff, or you've got to have some resource externally that's able to implement the open source solution for you in a meaningful way. So there are a couple different solutions to that. One is that you actually have the experience in-house, that you bring them in and you've got someone with the skill that can do it, meaning that they might have a little bit of code skill, but they certainly have the ability to implement. Or you buy a prepackaged open source solution from a vendor which may have the advantages of the cost reductions that open source provides, yet has someone else's skills layered on top as a value add. So those are kind of some of the things that you'd look for or you'd have to consider when looking at open source, because while it is free software, there is no such thing as completely free, unfortunately.
Right.
But it certainly is less costly than a full proprietary solution by a large margin.
Okay. So, as in your position as community director, what are some of the rewards and the challenges that
Sure.
go along with that position?
Sure. I think the rewards are much greater than the challenges right now. I get to meet pretty much all of the developers across the spectrum building Asterisk solutions and building telephony solutions in general, and not just telephony solutions, but even when Asterisk is a small part of a much larger application suite where we are being used as a tool in a Web 2.0 or a mobile application or something like that. So I get to see a huge variety of really interesting things that people are doing with Asterisk and meet a lot of the developers who are actually implementing it and a lot of the idea people behind that. Sure. And I think I get kind of the fallout of that is I get a lot of great dinners with people who are just absolutely fascinating with the ideas they're building and their intellectual concepts behind open source software and just building products in general. And some of the challenges are that you've got to convince people to be good members of the community so that when they do implement an open source solution, that the changes that they make or the patches that they make or even some of the features that they've built, to encourage them to contribute that back to the group is sometimes challenging based on what their business goals are and what their concerns about competition or even just sometimes embarrassment. Some people say, oh, that feature wasn't so good, and you have to encourage them to say, no, it actually was. This is a great feature. You really should contribute this back. And other people will help it out and make it part of the mainline source code. So it's a delicate balancing act between getting companies to, contribute things back while still protecting their intellectual property rights for the products they built based around something like Asterisk.
Right. Well, keeping on that theme, then, how do you balance at Digium? How do you balance the open source nature of Asterisk versus the for-profit entity
Sure.
that is Digium?
That is a tough balance to go with. But what we have is we don't exactly have a wall in the company, but there are certain people who do open source work, and that's all they do. They do code for our open source free versions of the software, and there's actually a fairly large group of people that do that. And then we have the hardware base and the appliance base that does things like our SwitchVox platform and builds pieces and components for that. And so we kind of have that division of labor right now. And we really think that having the for-profit arm actually makes the non-profit side of the business possible. Because if it didn't exist, I think that the Asterisk project would be certainly significantly stifled as far as growth, because we do have the ability to create profit from the work that we do. And it migrates from the open source side into the closed source side, and also the vice versa.
Right. Okay. And last question, what are some of the challenges that you see with open software adoption in the enterprise space?
Sure. One of the biggest challenges is the fear, uncertainty, and doubt factor that, open software is going to have more bugs in it, and we're going to have less stability and more security problems, and that's really a difficult position to take on the opposing side because it's hard to prove that open source software is any more or less secure than closed source software, except when you actually look at the number of security flaws and the rapidity of completion. Open source software sees a much faster rate of turnaround, but proprietary software very often disguises and hides its flaws, and so we are a little bit more vulnerable to that. So that's one of the difficulties. One of the other challenges is, as I said, convincing companies to contribute their software back. we spend a lot of time talking with a lot of huge companies who implement Asterisk in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users range, who really don't want to say that they're using Asterisk not because they're unhappy with the software, but because by saying that they've suddenly revealed that there is what they perceive to be a competitive advantage to using open source software, and so they keep that very tightly controlled. So convincing them to open up, and we have convinced quite a few companies. As an example, NTT recently, as one of our Innovator Awards, has said that they're building a production system that will hopefully be deployed soon. But that kind of negotiation to have those kind of companies say that they're using open source software has been difficult. And I think looking at something like Linux, we're kind of following the same path. A number of years ago, companies just wouldn't say that they're running Linux. They would keep that very hush-hush. You know, the IT guys knew it, but no one else did. And we're a few years behind that as far as the way Asterisk is being deployed in large enterprise. And then now people are starting to say, well, yeah, actually, we've been using Asterisk the whole time, and we're now proud of the fact that we're doing that because it's no longer seen as a potential competitive advantage to somebody else trying to do the same thing.
Right. Okay. Well, John, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with John Todd, the open source community director